Disclaimer: this story is a fictional horror narrative inspired by the legendary persona of Ozzy Osbourne and popular myths surrounding his music and legacy. The characters, events, and supernatural elements described are entirely fictional and not intended to depict real people, experiences, or events. This content is created for entertainment purposes only, particularly for fans of paranormal tales and rock-inspired folklore. Listener and reader discretion is advised, as the story contains dark themes, disturbing imagery, and fictional representations of the occult. It began on a cloudy Sunday at a flea market just outside Pasadena. Owen, a 29-year-old vinyl collector and part-time DJ, was digging through a dusty crate marked private stock. His fingers paused when they brushed against a black, unmarked record with no label, just a carved symbol scratched into the vinyl, an upside-down cross through the letter O. The seller, a frail man with milky eyes, watched him closely. "That one's not for playing at night," he muttered. Owen chuckled, thinking it was just a gimmick to make the record seem rare. He paid $20 and left with his new prize. Later that night, Owen cleaned the vinyl carefully and set it on his turntable. The needle dropped, and what came through the speakers wasn't music. Not really. It started with a long hiss, like static mixed with wind blowing through an old crypt. Then came whispers. Faint, guttural, and rhythmic. They didn't sound like English or any language Owen recognized. As the sound continued, the air in his apartment turned ice cold. The light bulbs dimmed, and for a moment, the shadows on the walls seemed to sway, as if reacting to the sound. Startled, he turned off the record and blamed the bizarre experience on poor audio quality. But at 3:03 a.m., Owen woke to the record spinning again. His turntable wasn't even plugged in. The same eerie whispering returned, louder this time. Words were now clearer. He still sings. Obey. Ascend. The mirror across the room reflected something behind him, tall, dark, and cloaked. He spun around, but nothing was there. He tried to dismiss it all as stress and lack of sleep. But strange things kept happening. Whenever he played the record, he'd feel watched. Furniture shifted on its own. His bedroom door creaked open slowly every night, exactly at the same time the whispers had started. The whispers themselves grew louder, turning into slow, haunting chants that pulsed with his heartbeat. Even his cat began acting strangely, hissing at the speakers, then vanishing one night and never returning. In desperation, Owen took the record to a retired sound engineer he knew from his college days. The old man agreed to analyze it out of curiosity. But after listening to just a minute, he slammed the stop button, visibly shaken. "This isn't just audio," he whispered. "It's a ritual. A dark one." He refused to speak further and warned Owen to destroy the record immediately, even offering to pay him just to leave with it. Instead, Owen posted a short audio clip online, asking the internet if anyone could identify the strange language or sound. Within an hour, the post was removed by moderators. Several users messaged him privately, begging him not to play it again. One wrote, "That chant belongs to something that doesn't sleep." Another claimed their dog died after playing it, and a third described waking up with bleeding ears and the word "sing" written on their bathroom mirror in condensation. By the fifth night, Owen stopped sleeping. The record now played by itself regularly, sometimes even without the needle touching the surface. He tried to break it, but the vinyl wouldn't scratch, snap, or melt. He dreamed of concerts in the dark, of crowds chanting backwards, and of Ozzy Osbourne himself with hollow eyes and smoke pouring from his mouth. In those dreams, Owen stood center stage, playing the record over and over. One night, he awoke to find the words "Sing for Me" burned into the ceiling above his bed in black soot. Terrified, he locked the record in a metal box and drove 2 hours to the beach, intending to throw it into the ocean. But when he opened the trunk, the box was gone. In its place was a cassette tape with one handwritten word, Part 2. And Owen realized with growing dread that this wasn't just a cursed object. It was a beginning. The story of the jacket had always floated around backstage, told in hushed tones by older roadies, dismissed as rock and roll legend by most. But Marcus knew better. He had worn the jacket. And what followed nearly destroyed his mind. Marcus had spent nearly 2 decades working as a road technician for various heavy metal bands. In 1992, during the No More Tears tour, he got the opportunity to work closely with Ozzy Osbourne's team. That's when he first saw it, a black leather turd jacket, worn, cracked, and covered in patches from dozens of past shows. It hung in the dressing room like a forgotten relic, untouched and somehow revered. On the third night of the tour, Marcus borrowed the jacket without thinking. It was a cold evening in Chicago, and his own coat had gone missing. He slipped it on casually, not realizing until later that no one ever wore it. That night, as he walked back to the tour bus, he felt strange. Heavy, as if something was riding on his shoulders. The shadows along the alley twisted and stretched in unnatural directions, following him even when he turned. He dismissed it as exhaustion. But that night was only the beginning. He began having intense, vivid dreams, visions of faceless crowds screaming, not cheering. Ozzy's voice echoed in those dreams, but distorted and deep, like something speaking through him. One night, Marcus woke up with bloody scratches across his chest, as though something had tried to claw its way in or out. Within days, Marcus's behavior changed. He grew paranoid, violent, and withdrawn. Other crew members noticed. He'd mutter to himself constantly and would often stare into corners, eyes wide, as if watching something move in the darkness. He kept wearing the jacket. When someone joked about burning it, Marcus lashed out, physically. "He needs it," he said cryptically. "He's not done." The other roadies began avoiding him. Then came the night in Denver. After a show, the crew was breaking down the stage when a loud, guttural scream echoed from the green room. They rushed in to find Marcus convulsing on the floor, eyes rolled back, choking on his own tongue. The jacket was beside him, smoldering as if it had been lit on fire, but no flames were visible. Someone tried to remove it, and it burned their hands. Marcus was rushed to the hospital and placed in a coma. The doctors never found a medical explanation. He remained unconscious for 3 days. When he woke up, he was a shell, silent, unblinking, and afraid of his own reflection. He quit the tour immediately and disappeared for years. Years later, a documentary filmmaker named Rachel tracked Marcus down for a project about haunted tour stories. What she found was a man completely changed. He lived in a remote cabin in Oregon, far from cities or music scenes. When she asked him about the jacket, he refused to speak. Only after 3 days of trust building did he share the truth. According to Marcus, the jacket wasn't just Ozzy's tour attire, it had been used in a ritual. Backstage at a European show in the 80s, a self-proclaimed occultist had gifted it to Ozzy as a joke, a way to channel the spirit of the stage. But something had attached itself to it, something that fed off sound, energy, and chaos. Marcus believed the jacket had absorbed decades of performances, screams, and dark intentions. Wearing it meant becoming a conduit for whatever presence lingered inside. Before Rachel left, Marcus showed her the jacket. He had locked it inside a glass case, buried under rock salt and mirrors. Sometimes, he whispered, I still hear it sing. That night, Rachel captured an audio recording in the cabin, a low growl followed by faint humming that matched the melody of Mr. Crowley. The footage never made it into her documentary. Within weeks, her editor went blind after watching it, and the sound tech suffered seizures. Rachel deleted the file and warned others not to pursue the story. As for Marcus, his cabin was found burned to the ground a year later. No body was recovered. But among the ashes was the glass case intact. And inside it, the jacket. Untouched. Waiting. The old Grimsley Theatre in northern England had been closed to the public since the late 90s. Officially, it was due to structural concerns. Unofficially, locals whispered a different story, about strange music heard echoing at night, sightings of figures moving behind the red curtains long after the final performance, and a thick, unnatural fog that sometimes poured out from beneath the stage door. But it wasn't until 2 urban explorers, Lucy and Dean, documented their visit on a paranormal YouTube channel that the world started paying attention. They hadn't gone there for Ozzy Osbourne. In fact, They didn't even know the theater was connected to him until they found the graffiti. On the back wall of the green room, faded beneath layers of spray paint, were the words Ozzy, 1984. It followed me home. Dean was the first to notice the energy shift. The air grew heavy the moment they crossed into the dressing room corridor. Their camera began glitching, showing brief flashes of what looked like candlelight, even though the building had no power. The green room itself was strangely well-preserved, dusty, but untouched by vandalism. Old makeup still sat on the counters. A half-shattered mirror hung crooked on the wall. But it was what lay in the center of the room that froze Lucy in place, a faded chalk pentagram drawn on the wooden floor, surrounded by melted candle stubs and rusted razor blades. At first, Dean thought it was the work of pranksters. But Lucy, who had studied occult symbols for fun, recognized the pattern immediately. This was a summoning, she said quietly. The longer they stayed, the more intense the atmosphere became. A faint humming noise filled the room, not coming from any device, but from the walls themselves. Lucy knelt to examine the markings and found something deeply unsettling. The names of 4 cities etched into the corners of the pentagram: London, Berlin, Detroit, and Los Angeles. Dean, flipping through a nearby old stage book, found that Ozzy had toured all 4 of those cities back-to-back in 1984. The connection was undeniable. Suddenly, the mirror on the wall flickered. Both explorers turned toward it. For a brief second, they saw their reflections replaced by a pale man with hollow eyes, standing silently between them. Lucy screamed. When Dean spun around with his flashlight, the room was empty, but the temperature had dropped by at least 20 degrees. They tried to leave, but the corridor they came through was now completely black, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Their flashlight beams dimmed as they retraced their steps. That's when the chanting began, low, rhythmic, and distant, like an audience repeating a forbidden hymn. Lucy recorded it, but the audio file later revealed a second voice layered beneath, deep, inhuman, and whispering her name. When they finally escaped the theater, Lucy was covered in scratches that hadn't been there before. Dean had bite marks on his shoulder, though he swore nothing ever touched him. They uploaded the footage that night, but within 48 hours, the video was pulled from YouTube without explanation. The file was also corrupted on their backup drives. All that remained was a single still image of the green room, with a dark figure standing just behind Lucy, partially visible in the mirror. In a desperate attempt to understand what they had witnessed, Lucy reached out to a retired stage manager who had worked the Grimsley in the 80s. His reply was chilling. According to him, during Ozzy's 1984 stop at the theater, an impromptu backstage ritual had taken place. It began as a joke, a dare involving blood, a mirror, and a spoken offering. But something had responded. After that night, Ozzy reportedly refused to perform in the venue again. The next day, the lead guitarist fell ill. The keyboardist quit the band altogether. And 3 months later, a sound tech who had been present during the ritual was found dead in his apartment, his mouth filled with melted wax. Lucy and Dean never returned to the Grimsley Theater. In fact, they never filmed another paranormal video again. But sometimes, during interviews, Lucy speaks about the green room. She says it isn't haunted in the traditional sense. It's not a ghost that lives there, she says. It's something older. And every time someone enters that room, it remembers. Logan was a struggling guitarist living in a cramped apartment above a tattoo parlor in Detroit. He had the passion, the talent, and even a small following online, but something was always missing from his music. His riffs lacked edge. His solos felt soulless. So when he found an old, beat-up Gibson Les Paul at a pawn shop downtown, he saw it as a chance to level up his sound. The guitar was tucked away in a glass case, labeled simply, "Not for sale, private item." But when Logan asked the owner, a bald man with a single clouded eye, he smiled slowly and said, "It's yours, if you understand the cost." Logan paid cash, more than he should have, and took the guitar home. It was surprisingly heavy. The wood was stained dark, with odd carvings along the neck, symbols that looked vaguely like runes. It had no brand markings, no serial number. Only 3 words were scratched into the back plate: "Sing, bleed, obey. From the moment Logan plugged it in, everything changed. His fingers moved faster. His notes rang louder. The distortion he normally dialed in carefully seemed to generate itself, thick, pulsing, hypnotic. He recorded a solo that night that gained thousands of views in hours. Comments poured in. "You sound possessed." "I felt chills listening to this." "What is this tuning? It's not human." But then came the side effects. Logan began losing time. Hours would pass while he played, though he remembered only seconds. He stopped sleeping, yet never felt tired. He heard whispers in the amplifier, even when it wasn't turned on. One night, he woke up with dried blood on his fingertips and a new melody carved into his wall with the words, "Play this next." He performed the melody in a live stream. His eyes rolled back halfway through, and his voice changed deeper, guttural. Viewers commented in real time, begging him to stop, but Logan didn't remember any of it. The next morning, the stream had vanished, removed for violating community guidelines. The file was corrupted. His camera melted internally, literally warped from the inside out. Logan's friends tried to intervene. His girlfriend, Kara, begged him to get rid of the guitar. "You're not yourself anymore," she said. But he couldn't. The guitar felt bonded to him. When she tried to take it while he slept, he awoke screaming, convulsing on the floor, foam pouring from his mouth. "He's watching," he choked out before passing out. Desperate, Kara contacted a local paranormal investigator who specialized in haunted objects. They came with EMF meters, salt lines, EVP recorders. Nothing worked. When they tried to move the guitar, it screamed. Not metaphorically, the amp emitted a screeching cry, so loud it cracked a window and sent one investigator to the ER with ruptured eardrums. Then came the dreams. Logan saw himself on stage before a massive crowd, playing music that summoned shadows from beneath the earth. Ozzy was always there in the corner of the dream, silent, smiling, eyes dark as obsidian. One night, Logan awoke to find his fingers shredded, raw down to the bone, blood soaking his bedsheets. The guitar lay on his chest. He recorded one final piece and uploaded it under the name Black Prayer. The video was only 3 minutes long. Those who heard it reported nightmares for weeks, visions of shadowy concerts, backwards hymns, and rooms filled with flickering candles and whispering mouths. Several claimed to see a cloaked figure appear in their reflections, standing behind them watching. Logan disappeared 2 days later. His apartment door was locked from the inside. The guitar was gone. All that remained was a message burned into the ceiling: "The concert never ends." Months later, a new guitarist emerged on a dark corner of the internet. No face, no name, just hands playing impossible music. Commenters noticed something strange: the same Gibson Les Paul, with the same carvings. Some even slowed the video down and swore they could hear a second sound layered underneath the guitar. It wasn't another instrument. It was a voice. And it was singing in reverse. It was found at an estate auction in Surrey, England, tucked away inside a locked wooden trunk, along with faded photographs and vintage cosmetics. The item that drew the most attention, however, was a red leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, with a faint floral scent still lingering in its pages. On the inside cover, written in elegant script, were the words, "Property of Sharon R. Osbourne. Do not read. Do not remember." The journal was acquired by Angela Fry, a celebrity memorabilia collector who specialized in rare diaries and letters. She believed it was simply a personal relic from the early years of Sharon's career. But the deeper she read, the less certain she became. The entries weren't what she expected. They weren't gossip, nor tore details. They were warnings, observations, terrified thoughts written in frantic handwriting, often mid-sentence, with entire paragraphs scratched out or smeared by ink, tears, or something darker. The first entries were dated 1981. Sharon described her excitement and pride in managing Ozzy's solo career. But within weeks, the tone shifted. She wrote of strange behavior, Ozzy speaking in his sleep in languages he didn't know, waking up with his hands stained with ash and wax. She mentioned how mirrors in their home began to distort his reflection. how the walls of their bedroom would sometimes vibrate at 3:33 a.m., exactly the same time every night. Then came the mention of the visitor. Sharon wrote about a man who began showing up backstage at Ozzy's concerts. No one knew his name. He never appeared on guest lists. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a velvet coat, and his face was always partially in shadow, impossible to photograph. Sharon claimed Ozzy seemed drawn to him, as if under a spell. After every meeting, Ozzy would write songs in a frenzy, eyes wild, barely speaking for days. One song, titled The Seventh Tone, was never released. Sharon claimed it was banned by their producer after 3 technicians suffered seizures while mixing it. Later pages of the journal became more unhinged. Sharon described nightmares she couldn't wake from, waking to find herself mid-performance, surrounded by a crowd chanting words she didn't understand. Her most frequent recurring vision involved Ozzy standing in the center of a stone circle, barefoot and bleeding from the eyes, singing to a sky full of screaming faces. One passage stood out. He brought something back from Germany. It's not a spirit. It's not a demon. It's older. And it listens when he plays. I see it in the corners of our home. In the mirror behind his amplifier. When he finishes a song, it claps. But it never smiles. Angela stopped reading after that. She contacted several paranormal experts, hoping to authenticate the claims as part of some forgotten folklore. But when she sent them scans of the pages, their responses were swift and terrified. One refused to speak with her. Another begged her to destroy the journal. A third sent a chilling warning, "You've opened something. Put it back." Angela, unsure of what to believe, decided to place the journal in a sealed case and store it in her collection vault. But strange occurrences began shortly after. Her dog refused to enter the room where the journal was kept. Lights flickered. One night, Angela returned home to find every speaker in her house, television, phone, smart devices, all playing the same 3-second loop of reversed audio. When slowed down, the words became clear. He still sings through her. 3 days later, Angela vanished. Her home was discovered in perfect condition, except for one thing: the journal was missing. In its place, resting on her desk, was a torn page from the back of the book. Scrawled in frantic handwriting were the words, "It was never about him. I was the one he needed. I'm sorry. Tell them to stop playing the music." To this day, the journal has not resurfaced. But recently, fans have noticed something strange in old recordings of Sharon Osbourne's TV interviews, brief glitches in the audio when she speaks about Ozzy's early career. In slowed footage, her lips seem to form different words. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear it. A second voice. The infamous moment when Ozzy Osbourne bit the head off a bat on stage has gone down in rock history as one of the most shocking, bizarre, and unforgettable stunts in live performance. Over the years, it was laughed off, mythologized, or brushed aside as an impulsive accident. But one woman claims it was something else entirely, a ritual, not a mistake. Her name was Casey Thorne, a then 22-year-old assistant stage manager working at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa, in January 1982, the night the bat incident took place. Now in her 60s, Casey had stayed silent for decades. But in a recent podcast interview, she finally revealed what she claims really happened backstage before the show. According to her, Ozzy had arrived in a strange state, more withdrawn than usual. He was talking under his breath to no one in particular, eyes flicking toward corners of the room where no one stood. His assistant kept adjusting the temperature, complaining that the room was too hot, despite the thermostat reading 45 degrees Fahrenheit. About an hour before showtime, Casey was instructed to bring a specific set of items to Ozzy's dressing room: red candles, a small mirror, a bowl of water, and an antique book written in Latin. She assumed it was part of a stage prop or a prank, but when she opened the door, the lights inside the dressing room were off. Ozzy sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by 4 of his bandmates and an unfamiliar man in a long black coat with silver rings on every finger. They were chanting. Quietly. Slowly. And the mirror on the floor was fogging, despite no visible source of heat. The man in the coat turned and looked at Casey. His eyes were pitch black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye. He smiled, thanked her for the items, and waved her away. The door closed behind her, but the chanting continued, louder now, mixed with strange humming that echoed down the hallway and made her stomach churn. Later that night, just minutes before Ozzy took the stage, Casey noticed something peculiar. A small animal carrier had been placed near the pyrotechnics cart. When she opened it, she recoiled. Inside was a live bat. Its eyes were wide, and its wings were tagged. Not with a tracking label, but with a strip of black cloth wrapped around its body, etched with faint white symbols. She tried to alert security, but they brushed it off as typical tour weirdness. During the show, when the moment came, when Ozzy took the bat and bit its head off, Casey swears his eyes turned completely white. The crowd, roaring and ecstatic, didn't notice. But those standing close to the stage did. Some fainted. A few claimed to have seen a shadow rise from the stage and dissipate into the rafters. Backstage, the man in the black coat was nowhere to be found. No one remembered letting him in. No one ever saw him leave. What's even stranger is what happened after the show. Several members of the stage crew fell over the following weeks. One suffered a nervous breakdown and was institutionalized after claiming he could still hear the bat screaming in the walls. Another reported intense hallucinations of Ozzy levitating above his bed, surrounded by screaming fans with empty eye sockets. Casey herself started experiencing recurring dreams of the bat returning, head intact, whispering in a language she couldn't understand. In every dream, it flew into her mouth, and she'd wake up choking. Eventually, she quit the industry, moved to a small coastal town in Oregon, and stayed away from music for good. But she kept one thing from that night, a single page torn from the Latin book, which she had secretly pocketed before handing it over. Recently, she gave it to a folklore professor for translation. His response? The passage wasn't Latin. It was Enochian, a so-called angelic language associated with summoning rituals from the 16th century. The phrase translated roughly to, "Through blood and breath, the gate shall open, and the voice shall return." Casey believes the bat wasn't a shocking stunt. It was the final act in a ritual designed to open something, to call something back. And she's convinced it worked. In fact, before the podcast episode aired, her producer reported strange feedback in the audio, screeching, wings flapping, and a deep whisper layered beneath Casey's voice. The producer deleted the file after waking up one night to find his mouth filled with feathers. The episode never aired. The house was ordinary from the outside, a large, aging mansion in the English countryside with ivy crawling up its stone walls and cracked wooden shutters hanging limp against years of wind and rain. To most, it looked abandoned. But to Miles Grant, a veteran music producer and former studio engineer, it was a time capsule. The mansion once belonged to a reclusive sound technician who worked with Ozzy Osbourne in the mid-1980s. After the man's death, the property had been untouched, tied up in legal disputes for decades. But when the ownership finally cleared, Miles, driven by rumors of unreleased recordings buried in the house, was the first to get access. He didn't expect much at first. Most of the main rooms were covered in dust, rat droppings, and moldy furniture. But the basement door, heavy and ironclad, caught his eye. It was chained shut from the outside. After cutting it open and descending the narrow staircase, Miles discovered something astonishing, a full recording studio sealed in the basement. Soundproof walls, reel-to-reel tape machines, vintage mixers, shelves of labeled and unlabeled tapes. It was clear that this had been more than a passion project. It was an obsession. He found a box marked O.OS, personal, with no dates, no track lists, just a single sticker with a black spiral symbol. The first tape he played was faint, warped by time, but what came through the headphones chilled him. It was Ozzy's voice, unmistakable, but not singing. Chanting. Slowly. Repetitively. Underneath, layered in the audio like a dark undercurrent, was a droning hum and distant screams, distorted, almost mechanical, but somehow emotional. As the tape continued, the chanting turned into guttural howls. Then silence. Then what sounded like heavy breathing. Then whispering. Miles froze. The whisper spoke his name. He stopped the tape and replayed it. The whisper was gone. Instead, it was replaced with what sounded like backwards laughter. When he fast-forwarded, the machine ejected the tape on its own forcefully. It clattered to the floor, unraveling in a tangled mess. Shrugging it off as electrical interference, Miles went on to the next tape. Each reel was worse than the last. One contained nothing but rhythmic tapping that matched the exact beat of his heart. Another had a low-frequency drone that caused his nose to bleed after just 3 minutes. The final tape was labeled, "Don't play this one." Of course, he did. It began with static, then a sudden bang, like a door slamming in a cathedral. A choir began singing, a twisted version of a hymn, but every lyric was reversed. Then came the scream. Miles dropped his headphones as blood poured from his ears. The sound had torn his eardrum. He passed out and awoke hours later, still on the basement floor, the tape looping endlessly without power. His watch had stopped at 3:03 a.m. Despite the injury, Miles couldn't walk away. He took the tapes home, planning to digitize them and figure out what he was dealing with. But strange things began happening. His dog refused to enter his studio. All his clocks stopped working at 3:03 a.m., just like the night in the basement. His neighbors complained about loud noises coming from his house, distorted music and screaming, when he hadn't been playing anything. He finally decided to consult a sound therapist, who ran a spectral analysis of the tapes. The results were horrifying. Hidden deep in the frequency range, below human hearing, were patterns that matched emergency broadcasts, distress signals, and brainwave manipulation frequencies used in psychological warfare. The therapist told him plainly, these sounds were not meant for the human mind. Soon after, Miles' personality began to change. He stopped answering phone calls. He claimed the tapes were speaking to him, telling him to finish the record. One day, he streamed a 10-minute video titled The Real Ozzy Tapes, Live Mix. Only a few dozen people saw it before it was removed by the platform for violating community standards. Those who did listen reported horrifying symptoms, hallucinations, nosebleeds, vivid dreams of black smoke pouring out of speakers, and faces melting under stage lights. One man claimed he couldn't stop humming the melody for days. Another said his daughter began speaking in reversed English after hearing it play through his computer speakers. Miles disappeared a week later. Police searched his house and found every reel of tape melted into a single pile of black plastic in the center of his studio. Written on the wall above it were the words, "We finished it. Now it begins." It started as a fringe rumor in the underground music scene, barely a whisper on obscure forums and vinyl collector threads. Someone claimed to have found an old radio transmission from the 90s, never aired publicly, allegedly tied to Ozzy Osbourne. Not a song, not a performance, but a sonic ritual. Within days, conspiracy podcasts, dark web archivists, and paranormal investigators were buzzing. But nobody had the file. No proof. Just hearsay. That changed when a Reddit user named GhostAmp77 posted a link. The file was titled Ozzy_trans.303.wave. It was short, only 2 minutes and 47 seconds. No metadata. No source. Just an eerie waveform and the cryptic caption, "Play this loud." The Prince of Darkness has one last encore. People were skeptical until they played it. The sound started with what could only be described as an ancient amplifier hum, followed by distorted breathing, then a single piano key repeating slowly, off-key, and stretched like rubber. As the track built up, background noises faded in, audience cheers in reverse, someone whispering, metallic clanging like stage rigging crashing down, and Ozzy's unmistakable laugh, echoing and warped, as though recorded in a cave. Then came a burst of static. That's when things started happening. Listeners described overwhelmingly vivid hallucinations, burning roses, faceless crowds, a silhouette standing at the end of a hallway with glowing eyes. One user claimed they blacked out and woke up with bleeding gums and no memory of the time in between. Another said their Alexa speaker turned on by itself and played the file on loop for 13 minutes, despite being unplugged. What terrified people most wasn't the audio, it was what came after. Those who listened began dreaming about a black concert hall, filled with people screaming silently as Ozzy, dressed in robes instead of his usual rocker gear, stood on stage, chanting. He didn't sing. He conducted. Behind him, a wall of speakers pulsed in sync with the dreamer's heartbeat. And always, always, the dream ended the same way, the crowd's mouths opening wider than humanly possible, as if something was being poured in, not out. Authorities, of course, dismissed it. Experts called it mass hysteria, a digital age moral panic. But when a small community college radio station in Illinois accidentally aired a segment of the file during their midnight show, 4 students were hospitalized within an hour for seizures and violent behavior. One tried to dig through the station wall with his bare hands, muttering about the hollow behind the sound. The FCC got involved, and the file was scrubbed from the internet. Accounts that shared it were deleted. The Reddit post? Gone. Even Ghostamp 77 vanished. But those who heard it swore they still remembered every note. Some claimed they couldn't stop humming it. A few said it played in their heads during moments of silence, like their minds had recorded it permanently. A documentary filmmaker named Dana Elric, intrigued by the pattern of events, set out to investigate. She interviewed sound engineers, psychologists, former bandmates, and even a retired priest who once consulted with Ozzy's crew during a tour where things got out of hand. He warned her, Ozzy wasn't just flirting with the dark. He was digging for it. Dana's research led her to an unreleased memoir written by a long-dead roadie titled He Spoke in Feedback. In it, the author describes Ozzy's growing obsession with resonance frequencies and ancient incantations that could be hidden in music. According to the manuscript, Ozzy believed there were certain sounds that could bend the veil. Not to summon demons, but to communicate across realms. Dana finished her documentary, titled The Last Encore, and uploaded it to several platforms. Within 48 hours, it was taken down for violating psychological safety protocols. But not before it gained 12 million views. Then, she disappeared too. All that remained was a voicemail she left for her sister the night before. I found it. The master file. The one from the basement recordings. I'm going to play it. I need to hear it. The message ends with silence, followed by a single piano note. Whether myth or madness, one thing is clear, Ozzy Osbourne's legacy is no longer confined to records and headlines. It has become a living echo, a cursed frequency passed through sound waves and circuitry, hiding in headphones and vinyl grooves. They say if you're quiet, truly quiet, you can still hear the final line whispered on that recording. This isn't music. This is memory. And memory never dies. 96.